And I'm Linda Size Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello everyone, and welcome to Arcane Mark. Today we are going to be talking about reskinning monsters in terms of how that can allow you to quickly, simply, and powerfully get the monster you need very on the fly if you're improvising, or for other reasons, even if you're not improvising, you might want to do this in advance if you have less time to prep, or you just want to surprise your players. So,
and another option may be if you have certain characteristics of your setting that are very different from the default setting for that particular game, and you're saying, well, in my setting, lasers are everywhere, but none of the monsters in the system have lasers, so I'm going to reskin to give things lasers.
Absolutely. So let's contrast the technique we're going to be talking about in this video with the sort of more thorough monster creation technique. Obviously, if you don't use these techniques from the video, one thing you could do is design an entirely new monster in whatever tabletop RPG you're playing. We're going to assume it's something kind of akin to Pathfinder or Dungeons & Dragons, which has creatures that are a particular challenge level or rating, and that you have encounters and battles with them. Because in some RPGs, maybe the character progression is horizontal enough that you don't have to worry about this. So most of those games, and certainly Pathfinder and D&D, have a creature creation rule set that you can use to make an entirely new creature. Now, this takes an amount of time that varies based upon who you are. For instance, the Pathfinder monster creation system, when I am using it, because of the fact that Logan and I created that system, and I know it very, very well, I can use it to build an entirely new monster completely on the fly. Most people can't, because it has a lot of steps. There's different tables with math. There's a lot of things that you have to do. For a lot of people, it takes somewhere between a half an hour to a couple hours to build a creature using monster creation systems, depending on how in-depth, how high level, how many special abilities, if you have to pick out a bunch of spells for the creature.
Do you have to come up with, its tactics and its story and its ecology and all that kind of stuff, too?
That's right. So, in order to save yourself that time, whether it's because you were improvising and then you described certain things, or the players even went off the rails completely into a place you didn't expect that had legends about it, or that might have had a creature you didn't know, or even that you didn't even know what the encounter was going to be in the place where they were going to, but really just kind of the default creatures that you could find in bestiaries didn't work for it. Whatever the case may be, if you don't have much time either during the session or to prepare in advance of the session, a quick and easy way to get exactly the monster you want is actually going to be to reskin a monster that you already have.
So how do you do that? You're going to want to start, if you don't, maybe you know exactly which monster you want to reskin, but let's be real, you probably don't. You're going to want to start by looking at what kinds of monsters exist of that same level that you're looking for.
That's right. If you don't want to have to do math, you want to start with the level, not with the most similarly looking creature.
Yes, exactly. And, maybe you can look one level higher, one level lower, because then you can use, elite and weak adjustments to get that. But you're going to want to look at ones that have some of the same fundamental chassis. So by this I mean, for example, if you want to make a construct, you're going to want to look at constructs. If you want to make an animal, you're probably going to want to look at animals and things like that, so that you have something that is going to get some of those baseline things in play.
That's the easiest way to make sure you're likely to be very close. But if you happen not to be able to find a construct, think about what your construct does. Is it like a defensive construct that is kind of tanky and protects someone? Is it like a beater construct that smashes mindlessly against its foes? And assuming you can't find a construct to use that's in the level range, look at things that all constructs have, because you're going to need to give it to whatever you're reskinning. And then grab something else that is similar. So if it's a mindlessly smashing brute, maybe a giant brute in that level could work. And instead of rock throwing, the construct like has an arm cannon that shoots out its hand at an opponent, and then you give it construct traits, for example. So the role, or specifically like the creature's type, like Linda said, are going to be the way that you are going to find the creature that you want to use as your starting point.
So you could do something where, for example, you copy all of the statistics and all the abilities exactly as they are, and then modify the way that you describe them, like what Mark was talking about with, like, you know, the construct that may have the exact same mechanics as rock throwing, but just be described and do the bludgeoning damage and everything like that, but just be described in a different way. Or you can perform slight tweaks to the mechanics that don't really fundamentally change the way the thing runs. Like, let's say that you have a monster that breathes fire, but you need an ice-breathing monster. It's pretty easy to scratch out the word fire and write the word cold in instead.
Yes, so the easiest reskin, you don't even have to do anything, is if you just want something that looks different, and it doesn't have to have any different abilities. So, for example, maybe you want a wolf, a road wolf that is extremely regenerating, and it actually should be about the same level as a troll. So maybe you could actually just use the troll statistics and change its, change which attacks it makes into ones that a wolf would make. Although, honestly, wolves could attack you with claws and jaws. That's possible. And then just keep the exact same statistics, but just describe it as this wolf that endlessly regenerates. And that might work in that particular situation.
Strikes are one of the things that you're often going to be changing in reskinning based on, like, the body form changing and things like that. But you can definitely either just change the word that you're using to describe it, like, oh yeah, now it's claws versus jaws. Or you can, you know, change the word you're using to describe it and then change some other feature, like maybe it does bludgeoning damage instead of piercing damage. Or maybe you had something, maybe you're going to change it a little more and you had something that was kind of a standard high accuracy, high damage attack, and you want to replace it with a, you know, high accuracy, moderate damage, agile attack or something like that. But you're still keeping the overall chassis and the fact that, it has a bleed on its critical or something like that, but you're changing out those kinds of basic swaps and strikes, but you want to keep like all the special abilities and how it works.
So one side benefit of this kind of simple reskin is that if you have a new type of creature that's the skull, that's a type of wolf that regenerates, your players might not, even if they're very jaded, experienced players who know every creature in the monster manual or bestiary, they might never have heard of a skull. And so even if it winds up having the same statistics as a troll, the skull could be something that at least at first they're like, what's going on with this wolf? And so it can help you in that situation, especially if you're, as a GM, like, you're dealing with players who are more veteran than even you are as a GM, or maybe you're all veterans and you've seen everything at this point.
Yeah, they're not going to know what to expect. And you can also, let's say that you knew, hey, I need a troll, but the trolls that are in the bestiary aren't high enough level. Maybe I take some other monster that's in that kind of brute category of smashing, and I find one that's the right level, and then I stick the troll regeneration on that. And
so
then
this is the more advanced technique.
Yeah.
This is a little bit harder, but this is exactly what you might need to do. So let's actually take that and make it into a more in-depth thing. So you're looking at a much higher level than there's actually a troll at. And you want to create a troll, but this is a very special, specific troll that you had. It was a purple troll, like on the thumb, and it was flying, and it was supposed to be a poison troll. That's why it was purple, and it would like spit out poison. So you look around at that level, and you're like, well, there actually is no troll at that level. There are some giants. I could change the giants into a troll and give them the regeneration if I wanted to do a basic, stronger troll. But mine is a flying poison spitting troll. There's actually a flying poison spitting drake at that level. or maybe there's not a poison spitting drake, but maybe there's a fire breathing dragon.
Yeah.
And you could combine the techniques Linda mentioned before, change the fire breath of the dragon into poison, and then try to add the regeneration. Now, when you're adding a new ability to a creature and you're doing it quickly on the fly, you're not doing like the whole monster creation, it's recommended that you make some adjustments where you like either remove a similar ability, by which I mean, we added regeneration, but we removed fast healing or some kind of resistance to damage or some defensive ability. Or you could make up for it by giving fewer hit points for the regeneration, or in the case
weakness.
In the case of trolls, they actually have high hit points, but they have a weakness to the types of things that get through their regeneration. And you could do the same thing, where you're like, so I'll take this fire drake, and I will make it look like a troll, change some of its strikes around to be more like a troll, give it the troll regeneration, but give it and give it poison instead of fire for all of its stuff, and actually give it a weakness to fire from being burned. And that's what gets to its regeneration.
And then you also are going to have creatures that do things that are really unexpected, because if this creature has if this troll has the burst of speed that you would expect from a drake, and it's on a troll, and then you're describing it as a super speed running troll, people are like, oh my gosh, I've never heard of a super speed running troll.
And you could describe it like this, because drakes have a burst of speed where they can move again, and it's not really well described exactly why they can do that once per hour or however often they can. It's not very often. With a troll, you can be like, this troll, it runs so much harder than it should that its legs start snapping from the fact that it just over abuses them to get this extra movement, and it quickly regenerates them back into place. And then people be like, can it do that again? And you're like, no. And they're like, okay, that makes sense. That was really stressful thing.
Or they ask, can they do that again? And then you recall knowledge.
Yes.
Because here's the thing too, because the fact that even the experienced players aren't going to be able to predict what's going on when you reskin is going to reduce the sort of metagaming around what monsters can do and add more value back to recall knowledge.
Right. So your little game when you're reskinning is to do what I just did there with the extra movement. Try to find a way to recast abilities that are in there, if you're not going to replace them, as fitting with the monster's tool set. For instance, let's say we did choose the giant instead of the drake. Maybe instead of rock throwing, this high-level troll rips off chunks of itself and throws those at people and then regenerates
bones
them.
At you, yeah.
It rips out one of its bones and throws that.
Yeah.
And so you can find ways to take the high concept or theme of the new monster that you're reskinning it into, and reflavor the abilities you've kept.
Now, there might be some abilities that you're not necessarily always going to want to keep every ability, because there may be some abilities that are really, really tied to the base creature and intrinsically tied to its type. You're not necessarily going to want to keep, if you used a construct as a chassis and then reflavored it as something else, it may not make sense to keep construct armor. Or if you're reskinning a fiend and it has an ability that's about being super unholy, but then your creature that you're using that for is not unholy, then that's not really going to work. So sometimes you're going to need to cut abilities, but you're generally going to want to do that with now I'm making it a troll, so I'm going to drop in these troll abilities and cut these fiend abilities or what have you.
That's right. And maybe you keep the construct armors. So let's think about this again with our troll example. Let's say we couldn't find a giant, we couldn't find a dragon. I don't know why. We just couldn't find it. We found a animated object with construct armor that was in there. So obviously, if we make that into a troll, we definitely need to remove the construct immunities, because there's literally no reason why a troll would be immune to the things that a construct is. But if we're willing to be a little flexible on the concept of the troll, maybe this troll is some kind of a battle troll that created almost like an exoskeleton or even a mecha suit. Not that it's a giant mecha, but it's a suit that they wear that protects them from actually being hit by the type of damage that screws over their regeneration. So maybe you have a situation where they have the construct armor, but they don't have regeneration at that point, because you're actually attacking the suit until you break it. But they also don't have their weakness, because you're attacking the suit. It has construct armor. It has high hardness Fire, yeah, that's blocked by the hardness. It doesn't do very much damage to them. But they can't regenerate the suit. And so then their regeneration, once you break the armor at half hit points, their AC goes down, their regeneration turns on, but their weaknesses are now applied because you've broken a hole into their suit and you've ruptured it, and now you can hit their weakness. So that's something that you could wind up just reflavoring into the creature in terms of how you decide to keep construct armor. Or you could be like, that's too much of a trouble. That's like a weird thing. I didn't necessarily want it to be in a suit, so you can just take it away. But keep in mind, that was a strong defensive ability.
So you're going to need to put in something to replace it.
Exactly. So whenever you're reskinning, you can use that as a springboard for your creativity. And all the numbers, those were done for you. So even if we spent the time that we just spent talking about this here back and forth, and you were doing that in your head, it'd take a few minutes, but it's going to be relatively quick. And that's a more complicated example of reskinning. We want to show some advanced professional reskinning techniques.
So, I mean, one thing that stuck with me with regards to reskinning is a discovery that you had in Pathfinder First Edition, Mark, which is how similar the stat blocks were for the owlbear and the tiger. They're basically the same thing.
The dire tiger and the owlbear was very shocking. I only, even though I used both monsters multiple times, maybe a lot of times, I only ever actually discovered how similar they were when we were moving on to Pathfinder 2 and we wanted to make the owlbear. And I was looking at it, and I was like, wait a minute. This is the same stat block, basically, at the same monster level. Some of the numbers are very slightly off, but mostly they're very close or the same. And then the dire tiger has, like, an additional ability the owlbear doesn't. And the owlbear literally doesn't have any abilities that the dire tiger doesn't have. And it was purely the lore and the iconic look of the owlbear had carried through an entire edition, probably more. I didn't go back and look at like the 3.5 or 3.0 ones, but they were probably similar too. An entire edition where it was almost the same as another monster of its level without people really noticing or commenting that these are essentially an identical monster. That's the power of reskinning. Because the look and the feel change so much, even if the math and the abilities are very similar.
Yeah, and I mean, fundamentally, with the charts as they are, there are going to be a lot of monsters who have exactly the high value, exactly the moderate value, that sort of thing for their numbers. And, you know, that doesn't mean that they feel the same because they have some of the same number patterns. It's the abilities that really... The abilities and then the way that the abilities are described that really make the monster.
Absolutely. And so, if you use these techniques, you should be able to populate an encounter in just a few minutes with weird or distinctive creatures that are what you need at the level that you need them at without spending a lot of time. In fact, it might take less time for you to reskin using this technique than it would take you to actually find an existing creature that truly actually does exist at your level range and is close to what you wanted to use. If you take creatures that you are familiar with already, and therefore you don't have to like do a big search through 500 creatures and then narrow it down to the level range that you're looking at, about 3 levels, and look through all of those, and you're like, oh, this name is the Shamanagada.
Yeah.
I don't know what a Shamanagada is. That could be one that I want. I'll click on the link. If you're using an online tool, you're like, oh, Shamanagada, no, that doesn't really work.
Yeah.
So it actually could wind up being faster for you to reskin, and you would feel probably that you have more mastery over running and using this creature if it's based on one you're familiar with.
Absolutely.
Than the Shamanagada, even if you did find it really quickly on the fly.
And then let's say that, you know, later you had to improvise on the fly, and then in between sessions you have more time to look at monsters, and you realize, oh wait, the Shamanagada actually fits this pretty well. Then maybe you can come up with a thing where both your monster and the Shamanagada are in the area, and they have some kind of like an interesting ecological thing going on, and the players are like, oh wow, this is really a theme that's going on here.
Right, but that saves you from the fact that even if you had a great search tool and it found the Shamanagada right away, it's possible that reading the Shamanagada stat block and looking through all of the things that it can do, all of the abilities it has, their synergies, and like thinking up the tactics of how you would run a Shaman Agada correctly with its combination of abilities, which one should I use first or which would I use in these situations, that could wind up being something that means that you run the Shaman Agada like less interestingly than it would have been if you did that on the fly when you're just grabbing a creature you've never seen before than you would have if it was a reskinned creature that you intentionally maybe adjusted an ability or two, but you did it because you knew why. Or it had abilities you knew because you'd run it before.
Yeah, exactly. So one other aspect of reskinning is we've talked more about monsters, but reskinning works really well for NPCs too. So for example, when it comes to NPC spellcasters, taking existing spellcaster stat blocks and swapping out their spells is basically like an all new creature in many cases.
It's true. You still have to do a lot of work just to pick the spells. It's not as easy as the other reskinnings that we mentioned, but it can definitely save you the time of coming up with anything else.
Yeah, and you don't have to swap out all the spells too. You can say, okay, yeah, I want this NPC to be doing like a fair amount of fire magic, so I found like a kind of like an icy blaster character or whatever, and I swap out a few of those spells for fire.
And if you find that there's not good fire spells at that level, let's say you're looking at rank 5 spells, which have Cone of Cold, Howling Blizzard. You could do a heightened fireball in there, but another thing you could try to do is just like, if it's literally already a themed blaster, you can just change the elements of the damage of the spells it already has without changing the spells. Sometimes that can be an issue because, like, for example, Howling Blizzard leaves behind a blizzard and then difficult terrain of ice on the the and you'd be like, what fire is making is it burning on the ground and that's why it's difficult terrain? Unclear. So that might be a little harder than it seems, but you can also use that not just with spells, not just with spellcasters. You can use those reskinning techniques on items that you're looking for if you want the form factor of the item to be a little goofier or different, like a fruit that has the power of a healing potion. That can sometimes make them more memorable as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And with these NPCs too, you can also pull in, say that they have, they were built sort of on the general framework of this was a fighter style NPC that has some fighter abilities. You're like, all right, yeah, I'm going to keep all the stats here, but I'm going to see this is a fighter ability that it was given. I'm going to swap it out for another fighter ability of the same level. I'm going to changing the ancestry, changing the equipment. Does this NPC have an axe or a sword or that kind of thing? And you can also take a look at it from the perspective of using that as a baseline to make kind of like a creature that also is like a monster while also having some kinds of abilities from these kinds of things. You can be like, all right, yeah, I'm gonna say that they're a troll and I'm gonna give them like the regeneration and this kind of thing, but that I'm mostly using this fighter stuff for their actual abilities for this higher level troll. They're a troll fighter.
So it's a Kenny troll fighter who learned many weapon techniques, and you're like, I just took this fighter, I added regeneration and a high weakness to the thing that it regenerates with, that blocks the regeneration, and I'm gonna go say it's a troll. Maybe if you look at other things that trolls have and you're like, well, but they should probably have jaws and claws, you can be like, they have it, but, they still fight with their greatsword. Because that's what the fighter's better weapon is the greatsword anyway. But maybe they have the jaw for, like, in case they want to make an additional jaw attack for some reason, or they get disarmed from the greatsword. So sometimes it can be pretty quick and simple to sort of combine and cross those streams, like Linda was saying.
Yeah, and then you would, or, maybe you keep it as, maybe you say, okay, well, I see that this one's really good at the greatsword, but I'm going to change it out. I will make one that's really good at the jaws and like, swap out its magic sword for a magic hand wraps or whatever. And then
that's right.
So you can do like the slightly more in-depth.
So there's a question from chat, which is if you're playing in an organized play campaign, not just using the adventures in your own home campaign, but actually playing an organized play, is it okay to make slight reskins or adjustments to abilities to spice things up, like having troll regeneration deactivated by Sonic and Cold instead of the types?
So mechanical reskins like that, no, but you can do reskins if it is if it's something that is required for the comfort of the table. Like, for example, if there's spider monsters at your table and you have a problem with arachnophobia, you absolutely can change them to web slinging lizards or things like that.
You can change what you say that it is,
yes.
but it won't. You can't change the mechanics because of the way organized play works.
And that doesn't change like the difficulty to recall knowledge or anything like that. It's mostly just because the idea is that things should be standardized, but that doesn't come before like having a safe and comfortable game environment for folks.
That's right. So when you're coming up with those kind of reskins, you can't make mechanical changes. The reason for that is you might have been able to make a great thing that just spices things up and it's just kind of a little interesting for the adventure. But I guarantee you, because I know examples of this, I know stories of this that I could tell. There's somebody out there who the little spice things up reskin that they think is going to just be for fun, usually not maliciously, just by accident, turns out to be ridiculously lethal. And since it's organized play and your character dies, they may either be permanently dead or you have to spend a lot of resources to get them back. This is not just such a silly thing when they make something ridiculously deadly. So that's why you kind of can't do that in an organized play setting. So there's another question from chat from possibly Neil. Are there any pitfall creature abilities that you might want to avoid combining during a reskinning?
Oh, yeah.
So sometimes, yes. Usually you're not going to run into one that's going to cause you that big of a problem. So I wouldn't I wouldn't put a layer of anxiety or dread on yourself to worry that you'll run into them. But if they are ones that should be combined, they usually might be obvious. So here's an example. Let's say you have a creature that has a regeneration and it's immortal unless it takes fire damage and it has a weakness to fire damage. And then you gave it immunity to fire.
Yes.
So obviously that would not only negate its weakness to fire damage, which means that its weakness doesn't mean anything because it's immune to the fire damage, but also it's immortal and the only thing that can kill it, it's immune to.
Yeah. So I would say that generally when you have a category like offense or defense, you're going to have something where, you know, either the creature is just middle of the road at all its numbers, or it's going to be in that category, or it's going to be it's good in this way and weak in this other way. You don't want to add abilities that shore up that remove the weakness without also knocking down the strength to make it middle of the road. So
yes, you also don't want to add the other side of that is abilities that double down or on a strength. So here's an example. Let's say you had a creature that its main big thing was it would make these big bruising attacks. They were strikes, single target strikes, and every creature it hits, there is a substantial and potentially deadly debuff that you have to make a saving throw against, and it's actually incapacitating. So it's a big boss thing, and it's going to attack you, and maybe it'll attack you again at a penalty, but it might not hit with that one, and you have to save or be paralyzed for a long time. So if you combine that by giving the creature a whirlwind attack ability that allows it to strike everybody in the battlefield within 60 feet at its highest accuracy, this could wind up being more dangerous than you think because it's allowing itself to apply not only a debuff, but one that can make people lose their turns to everybody at once instead of to just one person.
Or there's also sort of the double downing that comes in terms of, like, let's say that something has an attack that's inaccurate but is ridiculous when it hits. And you decide, well, I'm going to make it even more inaccurate and even more ridiculous when it hits. That's not going to be great because at this point, it's probably not going to do anything, but if it does, it wrecks.
Yes. Now, that's something that you're less likely to run into with reskinning, although we have mentioned it before when we're talking about adjusting or building your own monsters.
But I was thinking about, like, if there was a thing where you're like, oh, yeah, well, this was already, like, a brutish-style attack, but I want to add the persistent bleed that this other creature has onto it, and then, like, yeah.
And you're trying to think of how to balance it out, because we did say try to balance things out when you add abilities. In that case, if you were adding even more damage to it, I would worry if it already had high damage.
I would take away some of its base damage to add in that damaging ability instead, because the more that you are the more that what you were swapping out is from the same pot, the easier it is to balance it.
So Rohit asked a question that's answered by the same thing you said earlier, Linda, about don't shore up its only weakness, is if you have a creature that was already immune to magic and you decided to then add large physical resistance to it, could that be a potentially bad combo? I would say that if you're not going to take, you generally wouldn't want to do that if that's its only weakness was supposed to be physical. But it's possible that you already knew that and took a lot of things into account. But for simple reskinning, I wouldn't do that. And so so Kojo says, isn't that like the Mega Death Strike, April Fool's attack that Mark made once? Omega Strike.
Yes.
Yes. Omega Strike is a April Fool's feat that I never actually put out, but that essentially made it so that you make an attack and then there's a 99% chance it does nothing even after it hit, and a 1% chance it does 1,000 times damage. That is a very exaggerated reason why you don't want the ability that does Omega damage when it hits, but almost never hits.
Yeah. Well, in a way, though, what the magic immunity plus large physical resistance is going to wind up being a similar type of creature in some ways, because it's going to be a creature that, in order to balance that through things like hit points and AC, you're going to have a creature that either, like, you hit it and you probably don't do anything, or you find its one weakness and it explodes.
Yes, so in that case, also, this would be something that could maybe be created, but you would get into monster design and not just reskinning.
Yes.
We'd be beyond the scope of this episode to make a creature like that and on the fly out of an existing creature and make it not be potentially way off.
Yeah, at this point you're talking more about like a puzzle monster than like an actual regular creature, and that's the kind of thing that you're probably going to want to take a close look at from scratch.
Yes, it would be like you shouldn't reskin an existing monster into a Will-O-Wisp by giving it immunity and ridiculous AC, because Will-O-Wisp has very specific things that it's not very good at doing. Like, its damage is low and is easy to resist if you have electricity resistance and certain other factors on it that it's likely that whatever your starting creature is, you're going to have to make a lot of changes to it at the point where you've actually got it so that it fits in with Will-O-Wisp immunities and AC. You might as well have actually created a creature, and you're not in the, like, let's do a simple, quick, and powerful reskin to get this working.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So, yeah, reskinning is just as simple as that. And it's really a lot of fun. So I suggest that you try it, and if you could, leave some comments on this video with some ideas or ways that you use reskinning, the techniques that we gave you here to create something new and interesting, so anyone else who's watching this can take a look and maybe have some ideas for their own game. For now, I think that's all the techniques that I wanted to say, so please like, subscribe, even join if you want to join, and let's stick around for the vote.
Yes.
On the next episode.
Let's give
on
XP to
Saturday.
our viewers as well.
That's true. I actually gave it previously, but I did not give it in the last few minutes. So we can do that while we are voting for 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And since Build a Monster Workshop won on Tuesday, we're changing that to Build a Deity Workshop.
Indeed.
All the other votes are the same as they were last time. So what we mean by good metagaming is metagaming that is like helping the game, is beneficial. It's for the cause of good, because people use metagaming to mean that it's evil or bad or nasty, but actually you metagame all the time in every game, and some of it is good. And
yes, and sometimes by trying too hard not to metagame, you
you're
can actually mess yourself up.
And you are actually metagaming
in a way that is much less good.
In fact, a lot of people metagame when they're doing something where they're saying, I don't want to metagame, so X. Usually that is metagaming. So we'll talk about it if we do that one.
Oh, thanks, Kojo.
And yeah, Kojo said the choices for 3 have been really good recently. And part of that is because while we did come up with this one, Linda came up with that idea. About a third of our recent ones in 3 were user ideas that were either from someone who left a comment on the videos or who was in chat and came up with an idea. And since they were things people actually wanted and pressingly,
Yeah.
it turns out that made them
So
really
please
strong.
do keep suggesting ideas whenever you have them, folks, and we will put them on the poll.
We have 5 other for a reason.
We put almost everything on the poll unless there's like a very specific reason we're like, oh, that would be difficult to do for X, Y, and Z reason. Almost everything we put on.
Sometimes we think it wouldn't, the form factor of one of our YouTube live videos wouldn't really work for
There
it.
have been some that were like, that would be a giant video series.
That would be a huge series, or that would be something we would want to pre-script very specifically and work out some of the math in advance.
But we do also have some ideas that we've gotten from folks on our list of pre-scripting videos that aren't on the vote.
That's right. The video is a reskinned comment, and Koja says that he's supporting tyranny, but a good choice is a good choice.
The tyranny of GM tools proceeds.
All right. So we got this. The tyranny of GM tools. We're absolutely going to do good metagaming.
Man, how am I going to make a thumbnail for that one?
Are you a good metagaming or a bad metagaming?
Oh,
with Glinda and and Alphaba or something like that.
Oh yeah, that's good.
You know, like, are you a good witch or a bad witch? I guess Glinda says that to Dorothy when she comes in. She knows that.
I was kind of thinking the
Wicked
angel on
Witch
the
is
shoulder,
evil.
devil on the shoulder.
You could also do that.
Anyway,
those both would work. Anyway, take care, everyone. Have a great weekend. We can see you on Tuesday to build a monster together. Maybe we'll use some of these reskinning techniques that we talked about here while we're building it, because...
Is it going to be a mega chupacabra?
There's a decent chance it's going to be a mega chupacabra, because our viewer has been the most on pushing for having build a monster really wants one. And so that will actually test our reskinning techniques to try to bring chupacabra up to a much higher level. So come join us then, or join us next week to talk about good metagaming, or anytime you're